Hello there, and welcome to a brand new episode of Word on the Street. I'm Gene Find. Very simple name. Well, we're so excited to have you here today for this episode. I'm a little bit excited because I feel like I'm getting back to my roots just a little bit, kind of digging into the Word and breaking it down as to how I make it work in my life. How do I live this Christian life? How do I put the pieces in place? I want to be that which God wants me to be, but I don't really know how. And a lot of times, and this is really kind of where the idea word on the street means breaking it down. This is really kind of where I feel like I excel a little bit, not to get myself a big head. But sometimes I'll be listening to somebody's lesson, doing some kind of study, and it's just like, wow, that's so powerful. But I can see that sometimes the way that they convey the thought doesn't make it very clear. And I feel like I can break it down. I want you to understand it. God wants you to understand it. What does this mean? How do I apply it? All right. So today we're going to kind of focus into Ephesians chapter 4. And we're going to break down some verses basically about this idea of putting off and putting on. So let's get started. We're going to start in verse 21. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. You're at church, you're in somebody's house, wherever you are, somebody presents the gospel of Jesus Christ to you, and you make a decision, I want to accept Jesus into my life. I want to be a Christian. And it happens. And then, okay, what do I do next? Now, there are two words I want to touch on. The first one is not really related to this lesson, but it's important for you to understand it so you understand what we're going through here. And that's the word justification. Justification simply means this. When I accept Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for my life and surrender my life to God, I am justified. Before I was separated from God. I did not have relationship. Sin had gotten in, and now I was estranged from God. But now I've brought Jesus into my life. I am justified. I am made right with God. It's a done deal. It's not something I've got to do every day. God has declared me righteous because of my faith in Jesus Christ. And now I go forward from there. But the other element that comes in is a word called sanctification. Sanctification means the process of becoming holy or becoming what God wants us to do, have his life involved in us, listening to the Spirit, all those kinds of things. Becoming this new creation. There's a passage in 2 Corinthians, which I don't have written down, forgive me. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things are new. So there's this idea that we've become a new creation. But here's the reality. Just because I'm a new creation doesn't mean that all of the old things have disappeared. I'm still living in this life. I'm still subject to certain desires and temptations. And temptations work on the things that are inside of me. And what this verse is trying to tell us is, as we learn God's truth, as we learn who Jesus is and what he's trying to speak to us, our first responsibility is to begin to take off the old stuff. If I'm a liar, I'm going to get rid of it. We're going to talk a little more about that. But that's not the only part. Putting off is not the only part. Let's continue just a little bit so we can put the pieces together, okay? Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. So it's really a two-part process with a little something in the middle, which helps the second part work. The first part is putting off the old ways. Whatever it is that God reveals to me that I'm not to be doing anymore, that's just a bondage, it's destroying my life, I'm to put them off. Okay? But that's not the whole thing. I also have to put something else on. But I do that by renewing my mind. We go back to Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, that I'm transformed by the renewing of my mind. So as the Spirit reveals information that I didn't have through his word, through anointed speaking by the Spirit, I then begin to process that and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do instead of what I used to do. Instead of that thing, I'm going to put off that old thing, that old way of doing things, losing my temper, just getting depressed, whatever it was, and I'm going to now do something new, something that is God-like in my life. That sounds all great and good. How does that work in practical ways? Well, it just so happens that in chapter 4, if we continue on, it gives us a number of examples of this putting off and putting on. So we're going to go through these examples because I want you to really understand how this is done. And before I go much further, I also want to say there are quite a few things in the Bible that are put-ons that don't necessarily have a put-off, like go to church. You're not putting off something else. You're just starting something new. But there are things in our life that are put-offs that we have to get rid of. We can't do that anymore. So let me read the first one in verse 25. So stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. All right, so our first example is about somebody who lies. I taught for 15 years at a small private school, the church I was at, junior high and high school. And one of the courses that I offered in the high school was the review of a counseling book, a Christian counseling book. And there was always this one question that they would come in. There was 10 booklets that they would go through during the year as they went through chapters of this book. And there was this question: how do you know when somebody is no longer a liar? And they would always put when they stop telling lies. And that's true, but it's not biblically true. This verse tells us what's biblically true. A liar is no longer a liar when they not only stop telling a lie, but they begin starting to tell the truth. In other words, when I'm in a situation where I'm tempted to lie, let's say that I have a particular problem with lying. I like to stretch the truth and kind of not really give all the facts or whatever it is. I break that cycle. I begin to put off that old man and put on the new person, the new habits, by telling the truth, even when I'm tempted to tell a lie. In other words, my normal response is to tell a lie. Get in a situation, blah, 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 what happened here? Well, and here's where a lie would come. But now I'm a new creation, and I'm putting off the old way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the truth. Well, would I get in trouble? So instead, I'm going to tell the truth. Well, what happens if I get in trouble? Then you get in trouble. But here's how it breaks things inside of you. Because I start to tell the truth, and because I maybe start to experience some consequences from telling the truth, where normally I would tell a lie to avoid consequences that would eventually catch up with me anyway, because I tell the truth and have a consequence, I begin to determine inside myself, I'm not going to do things that require me to lie. It makes me change my behavior, not just in the lying and the truth part, but in other things. No, I can't do that because then I'm going to have to lie about it or this or that. Cheating on your taxes or whatever it might be. There's some areas that you do things and you go, I don't want to tell a lie anymore. I want to be able to speak the truth. The truth is always easier to remember, by the way, because it's true. It's not like you had to create it and then remember it. It's just what happened. There's this idea of putting off lying and putting on speaking the truth. You see that? There's this two-part thing. Put off, put on. Wax on, wax off. Whoa. All right, let's try another one. If you are a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good, hard work, and then give generously to others in need. There's this word that's going to keep popping up, instead. Instead of doing that, do this. So I'm a thief. I don't mean like you're, robbing banks, learning how to turn the knobs on the safe and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you just take things. Take somebody's glory on something, take somebody's possession, whatever it is, you steal from them. So what's the put off? The put off is stop stealing. But that's not enough. Because if you just stop stealing, what happens is there's these situations and there's a void. It almost demands something to be done. And you used to just steal, but now you're just sitting there doing nothing. God has a remedy. Instead of stealing, now you're going to actually, the reason why people steal is because there's something that they don't have. Somebody else has it or whatever. And they're not satisfied without having it. They're not satisfied with what God has brought into their life, so they're trying to, supplement that with something they take from somebody else. Well, now we're going to say, nope, I don't need that. I trust that God will bring things into my life that I need. Instead, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to pay my bills, etc. And the turning point is that instead of taking things from people, now I'm giving things to people. You see, it's an opposite kind of thing. I'm putting off the stealing. I'm no longer a thief, because technically I'm no longer a thief. I'm a new creation. I'm God's child. The thief was part of the old person, but it still wants to, raise its ugly head on me, but I'm going to turn it around and give to people from the hard work I give. Not everything, necessarily. Maybe you could, but I'm going to give a certain portion because I trust God's going to provide. So, okay, we kind of get an idea a little bit. There's still a couple more examples I want to go through because it's kind of important that you really get this idea. Because then what you're going to do is you're going to find things in your life. You're going to say, what is it that I'm doing wrong here? What is it that's part of the old man, the old person that I was? What does God want me to do instead? All right, here we go. Number 3. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. This is probably something that a lot of us struggle with, is just saying things that are hurtful. Sometimes I'm in a marriage counseling session with somebody, and they're trying to explain something that the other person's doing, and they use kind of hurtful words. Well, they did this and they did that. They are always, they just make statements that aren't helpful. I mean, there might be a smidgen of truth somewhere in there, but the way that they put them in the sentence is really hurtful. They're actually trying to kind of the other person just a little bit. You're a terrible person. It's abusive. And of course, we don't even need to necessarily go into too much about foul. Some people nowadays think it's okay. It's like the shock value is important. If I use this word, it makes the people pay attention to the godly stuff. But I think it confuses people too. A godly person would say that word. I don't need to say that. I've been married to my wife for 44 years. And knew her some, of course, before that. I've never heard her say a bad word once. Now, I can't say that about myself. It's been a little while now since I've said a bad word. But, I used to have this bad joke that seemed like I used one foul word once a year. Oh, there it is. Okay, I got to wait till next year. But I thought, that's not how I want to continue doing it. I don't want there to be any. I certainly don't want there to be any abusive language. But, sometimes it does come out. I just say, but I've learned, I'm trying to think about, what is this really going to accomplish in this situation? Is this really what I want to speak into the relationship, right? And that's the thing God's trying to get across to us too, to not use foul or abusive language. It's a control thing. People want to control the situation, that when their argument or their side of the discussion isn't going well, if I just use some foul or abusive language, I can take back control of the situation even though I'm in the wrong. So God's instructions are to use words that are helpful, that are an encouragement. Maybe you see something that's wrong in somebody, your spouse or anybody else, but you can say it and use words that are helpful. Like, it really kind of bothers me that the dishes are always a big mess in the sink, but I know I need to do my part to help. I got to get in there, and actually that's kind of true in my life. I've been really bad about it, but lately I've gotten better. Hopefully my wife will attest to that. But it wasn't helpful to say, why is this dishes all dirty? You're a pig. This is a pigsty, blah, blah, blah. That's not helpful. I notice that this is a problem. Is there something that I can do and do something about it or whatever? Say things that are helpful, that are an encouragement. Even when you find somebody that's doing something wrong. As a leader, spiritual leader, sometimes there's things that I need to speak to people. It's not always overly pleasant, but I need to learn to say that in love, to be an encouragement, and help them to see that their desire is to make those changes in their life for themselves, to be putting off and putting on things in their own life. So the idea is, again, I'm putting off speaking foul, speaking abusive stuff that's just meant to be hurtful, whether I intended it that way or not. The temptation is to always go to that level. Instead, I'm going to focus myself on finding better language, better words, encouraging words, helpful words to bless the other person that I'm speaking with. I especially shouldn't be talking about people when they're not around, right? That's just not a healthy thing to do. So again, we have the putting off the bad language, putting on helpful stuff. All right, here's our final example found in the final 2 chapters of Ephesians 4. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, there's that word again. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. So the idea here is that I get into a really rough situation and I'm just going to act all kinds of craziness, hold on to things, not be forgiving, That's really what the put off and put on are. Is instead of being mad and angry and holding a grudge and all that stuff, God calls me to be kind and forgiving. Again, that's not in our old nature. But the idea is that we are being sanctified. We are growing to be like Christ, be like Jesus. What would Jesus do? Right? WWJD. And Jesus would be forgiving. When he was on the cross, forgive them for they do not know what they are doing. That's pretty wild, isn't it? But this is what God is calling us to do. To put off bitterness, to put off rage, to put off all kinds of evil things, plotting, revenge, whatever. Instead, be forgiving. Be kind. Well, what about, the things that they're doing and they're not apologizing? Well, maybe you have to kind of slide away from that relationship. That's true. But don't harbor things inside of you. And be willing to forgive. Be willing to reestablish relationships if it warrants that. If the opportunity comes. Because I'm pursuing peace with all people, right? The idea is I'm not going to sit there and hold on to it. I may have to, in wisdom, somebody's been abusive in a certain way, sexual, physical, whatever. I may not need to be around them because it's just not safe. But it doesn't mean I need to harbor that and let it all just kind of boil and cook inside me all the time in anger and bitterness and madness and all that kind of stuff. Instead, I'm going to be forgiving in my heart, in my spirit before God. I don't want to hold on to those things. I want to let them go. And I'm doing that just like God did. That's a really big one there. Just as God did to you, to me, because of Jesus. So he was forgiving, even though we didn't deserve it. So the point is this: put off this bitterness, put off this rage and slander. Didn't you see this is what earlier when I'm talking about somebody when I'm not there. Did you see what they did? They did this and this, and I'm slandering them because I have my own perspective, of course, on what happened. Maybe, I didn't see it. The Bible talks about the first person you talk to about a situation always seems right. Always seems right. Until you talk to the other person. Oh, they didn't say that. They didn't explain that, right? And so this slander is I'm putting somebody down, but I'm not giving the person who's listening to me the opportunity to hear both sides of the story. That's slander. It's a fruit of bitterness. It's a fruit of this evil behavior, trying to get back at somebody with revenge and stuff. These are all symptoms of the old person that we were before we entered into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And God is saying, put those things off. Get rid of them. Cast them aside. Instead, be kind. Be tenderhearted. Be willing. The Bible talks about love hopes all things. I hope that they can change. Again, I have to use wisdom. I'm not going to put myself right back into a situation that is unsafe with somebody. I can forgive that person anyway. I can. I don't have to harbor things. I can pray for God to bless them, awaken them, speak into their heart, whatever it is. But I don't have to let that linger inside of me. I can forgive them. Why? Because I'm a new creation. I have the Spirit of God living inside of me. Jesus' power is inside of me. I'm becoming like him as he speaks into my life. And as I am submitting myself to this instruction, that if I was a liar, now I'm telling the truth. If I was a thief, now I'm giving to people. If I was using all kinds of bad words and hurting people with the things that I said, now I'm speaking kind things, helpful things, encouraging things. And whereas before I was always plotting revenge and just holding on to anger, now I'm forgiving and being kind, just as I would want God to be kind to me. Well, in fact, that he was kind to me. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for me. You're kind of picking up on all of this? It's good stuff. The putting off and the putting on. How, as God is renewing my thinking, okay, that is not what I want. I can see that now. God is showing me what I should be doing instead. I implement those things. And here's a key thing. God help me to do those things. God help me to be kind. Help me to speak truth. Help me to use encouraging words. All of those things. God, you help me to do those things. I can't do them by myself, but I recognize that you want to transform me, and I want to be blessed because I'm living my life as you would have me to live it. Hey, have an awesome week. I hope that this was a blessing to you, opened your mind up to some things, your spirit up to some things. You, if you're in relationship with God through Jesus Christ, are a new creation. You're not what you once were. Now begin to take those steps. Put off, put on, and walk with Jesus.